Roxas City is known as the seafood capital of the Philippines, and we are very rich in seafood, nature, and culture. When I took over last July, I've seen the beauty of this plaza. So I decided to embark into something that would enhance the beauty of these heritage structures. I commissioned the Signify Philippines. Roxas City is known as the seafood capital structures to lighting, and we are very rich in
Putting the
seafood,
lights
nature,
was
and
very
culture.
special for us Capistons. It made Capistons
When I took
realize
over last
we have
July,
this historical
I've seen the
sites
beauty of
in
this
the plaza. They became more
So I
aware
decided to
of our past, of our
embark
history,
into
of our
something that would
culture.
enhance the beauty of
They
these heritage
appreciated
structures.
more the value of our
I commissioned
identity.
the Signify Philippines. Roxas City is known as
Roxas
the
City
seafood
was now
capital
put in the tourism map because of these lights.
With the lighting technology in the interactive zone, whenever we have a special event, we can tune the colors to the colors that we want for that particular occasion, and we can even synchronize it with music. And we can actually change the colors of the lights with a flick of a touch screen on your cell phone. It's very economical as well because aside from it being accessible through Wi-Fi, we're also just using LED lights, which is economical when it comes to energy consumption.
Nag-iba talaga kasi maganda na tingnan ngayon ng ilaw eh, kasi maiwasan na ang paningin ng tao.
We can actually change the
More people appreciate that. More people are a sense of pride, resulting in more people coming over to the city and resulting in better business. Not only for this year, following months and years to come.
Malaking pinagbago ngayon, sir.
We like a lot.
Nakikita mo talaga, this will be a place where people can interact and enjoy, and it can boost tourism as well. Come and visit Roxas City. We are the seafood capital of the Philippines, the birthplace of President Wealth in Roxas. Now, the first city to have the interactive landmark lighting display. So ano pang ginawa natin? Bukod na! Sa Roxas City. Enjoy and it can boost tourism as well. We are the seafood capital of the Philippines, the birthplace of President Wealth in Roxas. The first city to have the interactive landmark lighting display. So ano pang ginawa natin? Bukod na! Sa Roxas City. Enjoy and it can boost tourism as well.
Hello? Che? Hello? Isa to, uno ka din na. Uno ka din nabas ako di sa, hello? Uno ka din nabas ako di sa ano? Hello, di mo ko narangan.
Hello. It's okay. Oh, can you hear me? Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Maayong hapon sa tanan, magandang hapon sa lahat. Welcome to the Hilway, an Independence Day webinar. This is sponsored by the Roxas City Government under the special programs of the Ang Panublion Museum in cooperation with Capiz State University Main Campus Library and the Center for Heritage and Indigenous Cultures of the University of San Agustin. So for this afternoon, um, we will be hearing some of the meaningful and informative insights from two of our speakers. Um, of course, our seasoned speakers this afternoon are both of my friends, and they are cultural workers, historian, and both of them are very good writers also. So for this afternoon's sharing of insights and knowledge and information, um, we would like to remind everyone to please turn off your microphones during the speech of our speakers, and then please reserve your questions or um, any clarifications after the talks. Of course, we will have an open forum wherein you can ask our speakers if there are any ideas that you want to share also. Um, Please reserve those at the end of their speeches. Okay, so we are glad that you are here this afternoon. And we would be grateful if you can interact with our speakers later on after they have delivered their talks. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce to you our first speaker, which is a very good friend of mine. We have been together in many occasions, in many cultural and historical related occasions. No, um, we we used to call her the Red Babaylan, and we are happy that um, she can deliver to us. And I think this would be very, very interesting and very insightful also. Um, and she will be talking about leadership and power, the Babaylans of Panay during the Spanish period. Okay, so our first speaker for this afternoon has a passion for history, culture, and indigenous people. She is honed by her experiences in teaching as well as engagements in the communities and the local government units. She had taught at the University of the Philippines in the Visayas and also served as a university research associate at the UPV Center for West Visayan Studies. She was a member of the board of directors of the Asosasyon ng mga Dalubhasa na may hilig at interes sa kasaysayan or ADHICA, Iloilo Balangay chapter, and also its vice president for internal affairs from 2006 to 2008. She has also assisted the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, NCIP Region 6 and 7, in the writing of the 3 Certificate of Ancestral Domain Title Claim Books, or CADT, for some indigenous people communities in the province of Iloilo and Antique. And currently, she serves as a faculty member of the College of Arts and Sciences at West Visayas State University. So let us all welcome, although this gloomy afternoon, our esteemed colleague and friend and seasoned cultural worker, no other than Professor Joyce Christine Colon. Hello, Ma'am Joyce. Is she in already? Is Ma'am Joyce here? Is she in already? Oh, she's getting disconnected now. Okay. She's trying to reconnect again. Okay, we'll wait for Ma'am Joyce. But I know that her talk this afternoon will be very interesting, and the talk is about the Babaylans of Panay, and we also um, had a bit of an idea, no, that the Babaylans were also members of the revolutionary forces, no, during the Filipino-Spanish Revolution. Okay, so is Ma'am Joyce here? Oh, okay. So, okay. Um, is Sir Christian here? We can um we can listen to Sir Christian first. Okay, I think Ma'am Joy is having trouble with her connection. Okay, so in lieu of Ma'am Joyce, we will listen first, no, to the talk of, again, a very good friend of mine, um, who will be discussing freedom from the unseen, Capiz, and the quest against cholera epidemic. Um, the speaker is a prolific writer, researcher, licensed librarian, licensed teacher. He has worked with various projects under the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. He has been the author of Panay Sayon, an anthology of writings, stories from Panay Island. Um, Also, he has been recipient of various scholarships, both local and international. And he is also a food writer, um, food historian, and certified plantito. Okay. Um, this second speaker um, is also a science teacher, and I guess this is why he has to share this topic to us about the cholera, no, during the Spanish times and its relationship um, to the current celebration that we have, no, the Independence Day. Okay, so without further ado, it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce to you our second speaker, um, Mr. Christian George Acevedo.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, friend. Good
Yes, friend.
afternoon, friend.
Okay. So first of all, this is not going to be a scientific discussion about cholera, okay? Because I am not a scientist now. But I will be sharing with you stories about the experiences of the Capisnons and also of the Filipinos during the cholera pandemic. Now, I think we could all relate because of what we are experiencing right now. And when I was reading the different narratives shared by different writers, um, leaders back then, I was able to surmise that what we are experiencing right now is a history repeating itself. So I think the slide is already available. Now let me start with a story. I always like starting every presentation with a story because I'm fond of stories from yesterdays, and I hope you're also fond of stories. So let's begin with the story of cholera itself. Now, many of us don't know that there was actually a folk tale about cholera that has been shared over 100 years ago by the people from Panay Island. Now, this folk tale about the origin of cholera was collected and documented by American teachers Burton L. Maxfield and W. H. Millington in the spring of 1904 when they were stationed in the island of Panay. Mr. Maxfield was assigned in what is now Iloilo City proper, and Mr. Millington at Mandurriao, now a district of Iloilo City, in the island of Panay, here in the Philippines. Now, here is how the story went. There was an old man named Tanag back then who lived in a town in the interior of one of the Philippine islands. He had nothing to eat, nor could he find any work by which he might earn his food, so he determined to move somewhere else. At that time, the cholera was at its height. As Tanag was rather old, he walked so slow that in a day he had gone but only 3 miles. At sunset, he was crossing a sheltered bridge over a smooth brook near the sea, and he determined to rest and spend the night on a bamboo raft along the bridge. At about 4 o'clock, he was awoken by the sound of a heavy steps, and by the moonlight, he could see that the newcomer was a huge giant with a long club. A little later, another giant came, and Tanag, full of fear, heard them talk. In the morning, Tanag saw the giants going to the shore, where many people were fishing with their nets. The giants flung their poison on the fish, and then disappeared from Tanag's sight. Tanag believed that the cholera was caused by the 2 giants who poisoned the food and water by sprinkling poison on them. And he overheard from the 2 giants that only the roots of the balingay and alibutbut trees would prove to be the antidote of the poison. So what he did was he gathered the roots and cooked them and boiled them and gave them to the people, and he advertised them. And he even told them he was a doctor. In fact, he cured many people and earned so much money that he soon became rich. Now, folk tales like this serve to explain the many things we are or were as perceived by the people in the grassroots level. It is their worldview and how they understand things. For this case, this legend serves as one of the explanations of an early 20th century community to have better understanding at why cholera existed, where medical science and health education was still from a distance. Now let's go to the scientific or medical, or you might even say Western perspectives about cholera. Modern science explains that cholera is an infectious disease that causes severe watery diarrhea, which could lead to dehydration and even death if left untreated. In Europe, cholera was known as the Blue Death or the Blue Terror, as shown on the image from the Wellcome collection, because a person turns bluish gray due to excessive loss of fluid. It is usually caused by eating food or drinking water contaminated with a bacterium called Vibrio cholera. In an epidemic, the source of the contamination is usually the feces of an infected person that contaminates water or food. The disease can spread rapidly in areas with inadequate treatment of sewage and drinking water. Now, we also have here some other reasons as explained by Western medicine, that it could also be due to poor hygiene, like failure to wash hands, and eating with one's bare hands, and also of poor waste disposal, which sometimes go to the bodies of water where drinking water are being taken, or which are also used in food preparation. Now, the Filipino natives, on the other hand, have their own way of believing that cholera outbreak, as influenced by their deep religious devotion and superstitious beliefs. The natives saw the 19th century health outbreaks as a proof of society that has run out of favor with the universe, as written by Ken DeBevoise in his book Agents of Apocalypse. The people of Capiz attributed the cholera to the three evil spirits which poisoned the people, while the Sulud people of Panay believed that the cholera and other epidemics were caused by spirits called the Ibabaw Non. In the town of Sibalom, in the nearby Antique province, cholera was thought of as caused by a black magic that engulfed the locals after a priest and his servants visited the community. Others alleged that people in the community vomit, endured loose bowel, and suddenly died after being touched by a man on the loose. Rumors also spread that powders were spread on the streets, and anyone who stepped on met their death right there and then. Now, the cure for cholera is actually sort of a showdown of both the local ways of healing and Western perspectives on medicine. Now, the lack of medical personnel, especially during the 19th and early 20th century, also meant that the locals would have to resort to traditional healers or herbolarios who served as the healthcare providers in the village. And these herbolarios would prescribe botanical or herbal remedies just for every health concern. As early as 1628, when cholera epidemic was already documented in the Philippines, in his book Labor Evangelica, Fray Francisco Colon described this and said that many locals suddenly went down even only a few hours of being infected. He further observed that the oil of manunggal bark, which is shown on the slide, was an effective remedy, and he claimed that it proved effective because there was no reports of death among those who had taken this remedy. He even instructed that to use the manunggal, one should pulverize or scrape it and dissolve it in a lukewarm water or coconut oil. The infusion of manunggal, already used as a diuretic, arrests cholera, it is said, and prevents stomach ailments if given on time. Now, in the book that she wrote in 2007, Maria Mercedes Planta, in her book Traditional Medicine in the Colonial Philippines, 16th to 19th century, she explained that the manunggal oil was neither an essential oil nor a plant extract, but simply coconut oil with macerated pieces or scrapings of manunggal wood, and was either given as a purgative in doses of 30 to 60 grams or applied to the abdomen in cases of stomach pains or indigestion. Now, in Panay, as told in the earlier legend that I have shared, we have the balingay and the alibutbut plants, which were boiled as a concoction and given to one who was inflicted with cholera. The alibutbut, for the plantitos here, I think you have this in your garden, it's also called the pandakaki. And the balingay is a type of rattan. During the Spanish period, Spanish medical authority gave alcohol and opiate against cholera, although this did little to alleviate the conditions of the victims. They also ordered the burning of lemongrass or tanglad and tar to counter infectious miasma. Medical officers further advised the locals to apply camphor-filled pills on their mouth. They also avoided any food except for rice, which was deemed the safest food. Now, a botanist and surgeon way back in the mid-19th century, who was with the infantry battalion, Príncipe Fernando, swore on the miraculous power of these prescriptions, which he published in his self-help book. His name was Gines Fernandez, And he wrote the Cholera Morbo, General Observations regarding the knowledge and treatment of the diseases prepared for the inhabitants of the country and for those lacking physicians in the provinces and villages. Now, according to Gines Fernandez, if someone has a cholera, he should take an ounce of brandy and if there is none, of spirits of wine. Dissolve it in 3 grains of camphor, add 1 scruple of vitriolic ether, and 1 scruple of liquid laudanum. Mix this, and if this prescription is given on time, you will believe that you have performed a miracle. But it is not so, it being the work of nature. Now, another anecdote from a Chinese medicine man said that the cholera was caused by a lack of vital air, of blood, of semen. The kidneys are not relieved. The water does not suffice for the fire, and therefore the passages are closed. The patient does not urinate, and sometimes the urine dries. Similar to the sky, when it does not rain, the earth dries. The patient must endeavor to preserve a tranquil mind, shun woman, and not tire his mind. So these are some of the prevailing conclusions way back then. Why was there cholera epidemic during the Spanish period? Now, after a cholera outbreak in 1943, the Board of Health, this is a group of Spanish officials, released a set of instructions to prevent cholera and how to control the cases. These measures were practiced for the rest of the Spanish regime, although little to no avail in preventing or curbing cholera cases as outbreaks hit the archipelago every decade. Now, some of the bizarre prescriptions include avoiding fresh air, okay, not drinking water if your stomach is empty, or don't drink water at midnight, or don't drink water if you're perspiring. Filter river water before drinking, using clean cloth, and infuse it with a decoction of Flor de Santa Maria, manzanilla, sage, ginger, or bizarrely toasted bread. Now, the text that I have highlighted on the red were emphasized by the earlier author that I have mentioned, that they were actually taken by the Spanish authorities from local healers. Okay. Now, another thing is, of course, avoid exposure to dew when sleeping. That's why one is told to close the windows before sleeping, or else you will catch cold. I think many of us will do this up to now. Then I think this also makes sense. Refrain from eating shellfish or fish that smell foul, and cold fruits like melons, watermelons, kamote, and bangkilines, especially if, well, later, the Americans had an explanation for this. Okay. Now, the locals and Spanish religious also held tightly to religion to obtain relief, healing, or salvation from the disease. Even in public health crises, the priests have vital roles to play, from allaying fears of impending outbreaks and seeking healing and retributions, amidst long suffering, to blessing and burying the dead. Now, for example, this was taken from the Archivo de la Provincia de Agustinos, the Filipinas, courtesy of Father Dedert Duarte. Now, it says here that we have a certain priest here. This was way back in the 1850s. We have Fray Placido Alba, who was the parish priest of Capiz, now Roxas City, from 1830 until 1857. Now, the Governor General Manuel Crespo commended him in 1856 because of his self-denial and evangelical zeal and invaluable service, which visibly contributed to the end of the cholera epidemic in the province of Capiz. Now, let us also not forget that the well-meaning Spanish priests back then established cemeteries outside of the poblacion for health and hygiene purposes and for practical reasons as well. As death by cholera numbered by the thousands, it was already impractical to host these dead bodies inside the church if you're rich, and outside if you're poor. The fear of contamination led the priests to bury the dead away from the population or outside from the pueblos. As such, in the pueblo of Capiz, which is Roxas City right now, we have the cemetery located outside or from a distance away from the city center, which is in the cemetery of Banita, although of course right now it is within the city proper. Now by 1851, El Pueblo de Capiz already had a cemetery built outside town, which was described as in good condition and is capable and ventilated. Between the 1870s and 1880s, another Agustinian priest, Father Apolinar Alvarez, improved the cemetery, which was later retouched and finished by his successor, Father Lesmes Perez. Now, another thing that I would like to point out is that I think San Roque is one of the most popular saints in the Philippines right now. Now, way back during the cholera outbreak, the blessings of San Roque was called upon to deliver the natives and the Spaniards from the deathly grip. A novena for the saint would be read for 9 days or longer, starting at the 16th of every month, followed by 8 days of indulgence by the cholera patient. Now, in his column in the Capiz Times, local historian Erwin Bonifacio wrote that Thomasite Hugh S. Meade, who was assigned to teach in Panitan, Capiz, observed that the locals painted a cross in front of their houses and in their doors, believing that the Blue Death would spare the household who painted it on their entrance. Wooden cross was also worn on the neck or kept one on the pocket for protection when one leaves the house. We also join the procession of San Roque. If a native puts a cross in his house, wears another about his neck, and then each evening takes part in the San Roque procession, he paves the rest with providence, said Meade. Although later on, this became a heavy problem for the Americans because religious gatherings are great super spreaders of cholera. Now, let's go to the town of Balete, which was still then part of Capiz. Now, in 1882, 144 people died during the cholera outbreak. The frequency of occurrence of the disease in the early times could be one of the main factors why the people of that town chose San Rafael, the Archangel, as their patron saint. San Rafael is patron saint of the ailing people. He was invoked for healing of their malice and protector against which oppresses them. Oral accounts in Balete tells us that whenever a prevalent disease afflicts the faithful procession, in honor of the saint would be readily devoted and be done. Now, let's go to the American period. Now, when the Americans came, of course, their medical advances are far greater than that of the Spaniards. They thought that cure comes with antibiotic and prompt intravenous replacement of lost fluid and salt if given immediately when a person is discovered as suffering from cholera. Although the latter was only tried in Europe in the 1830s, it was only implemented in the Philippines beginning 1909. That is why the only defense mechanism that the natives had back then was their strong resistance. Diba, Subong? We always tell people, pabakod-bakod na lang, resistensya against COVID-19. Now, since history is repeating itself, not everyone who were infected displayed the symptoms, and it was actually the asymptomatic who spread the disease. Relate. The more intense the infection, the less important the patients in spreading the disease, since he or she will be bedridden. That's according to Ken DeBevoise, who wrote the phenomenal book Agents of Apocalypse, Epidemic Disease in the Philippines in the Colonial Era. Now, DeBevoise further added that isolation of infectives and their household contacts would have been the most effective weapon, as it was against most infectious diseases. But it was impossible as a practical matter to keep a person isolated or quarantined inside his or her house. Relate again. The cultural disinclination of the Filipinos to separate from those who are ill, from the relatives and friends, along with the antagonistic nature of colonial relationship and the inability to enforce isolation precluded the means of control. Quarantine was impossible to implement, even today, since it proves very difficult to prevent people from moving. Now, for disease to reach pandemic proportion, there are only two ways for this to happen. High volume of infected individuals. So a lot of people in a community have the infection, and unhampered movement of these infected individuals, especially among susceptible population. Now, if you have a lot of positive cases and you keep moving around and you keep mingling with those who do not have the infection, especially those with comorbidity or susceptible population, chances are a lot of people will be positive. Now, going back to cholera, it also spreads because the carriers frequently excreted anywhere, especially on openings of bamboo slats on their floors. For example, and the dirt poops on a body of water like a river where the community converges to get water to drink, get food to eat, bathe, and wash their stuff. Now, this is an example. This was from the book of, I think, Victor Heiser. Yeah, or Dean Worster. Now, this is an example of a community where cholera was prevalent back then. Now, we also have political factors which serve as causes why cholera spread in pandemic proportion. Now, during the Spanish period, Spanish officials only moved or acted when they saw cholera was already underway. Like, for example, there was a cholera epidemic in Iloilo, and the authorities here in Capiz would only move when they saw that cholera was already spreading like wildfire in Iloilo. As time is the essence, the authorities had little to no time at all to implement preventive measures and set up cholera tents. An over-centralized colonial government and the chronic shortage of funds worked together to impair the ability to anticipate emergencies in the provincial and local levels. Provincial governments were usually tasked to organize local boards consisting of the priest, local officials, and medico titular, if one is available. However, these provincial boards were only formed when an impending crisis was foreseen, if sometimes only upon authorization from government in Manila. Despite these intentions of the Americans to suppress the spread of the disease, the manner of implementing their measures shocked and scared the natives. Their zealousness bordered to abuse, to include forcible administration of medicines in detention camps. For example, we have the anti-cholera campaign at the start of the 19th century. Now, this mingled with the pacification efforts of the American soldiers who were very much active in the 1902-1904 cholera campaigns. Now, Professor Eleto of Ateneo de Manila University opined that these medico-sanitary measures and popular resistance were continuing acts of war. Now, going back to the case of the Farola district in Manila, residents of the Farola were ordered out when there was a huge case of cholera outbreak there. They were ordered out and they were turned to the San Lazaro concentration camp. And then the most shocking thing happened. The American soldiers burned the entire village. As such, they earned the hatred of the natives. Manila was cordoned and no one was allowed to enter and leave. Kumbaga, ano naging niya? Martial law during the cholera outbreak. The first case of cholera outside Manila occurred after a cook smuggled food to a fiesta, and died a victim of the disease. 80 cases reported in no time. New cases were often introduced in localities where no cholera was recorded to escapees from the capital who brought food with them. As such, rather than cooperate, the natives resisted to American interventions. The natives escaped overnight or even by day if they could find a chance to escape. Now, what did the natives do? Of course, as what I have said, they reacted heavily to the cholera, the measures taken by the Americans. Now, a lot of those who died with the cholera are burned or cremated. However, this did not sell well to the Spanish and the Filipino residents who would want their dead loved ones to be buried. So they shocked them. So what the natives do, rather than surrender their dead loved ones to the Americans, what they did is that they simply dumped their dead relatives on the river, or they buried them underneath their houses. Or worse, they just left their dead bodies, and those who survived fled their houses. Now, these members of the family who left their houses did not know that they were asymptomatic or that they have cholera. And so they even spread the disease with them. Now, the Americans used the cholera and native hygiene as one of the reasons why the United States should further colonize and assimilate the Philippines. They used the media to promote among the Americans in the homeland that the Filipinos are savage and barbaric and dirty and unhygienic, that it is the white man's burden to develop the Filipinos. Wash them, for example, as you see in this propaganda material, wash them with soap, probably, and turn them into civilized, clean citizens. These insensitive actions by the Americans triggered anti-American propaganda. The Spanish residents were among those who went against the Americans for this. Now, the Spanish residents refused to believe the presence of cholera, and they thought it's just an American war tactic. Ill-intentioned individuals or those against the Americans spread rumors that those with cholera would be interned in the detention camps, or simply they would be given a medicine that would kill them. In fact, the rumor of being poisoned stemmed from the use of strychnine on the left side of the slide, as a heart stimulant administered to cholera patients. Worse, they accused of Americans dropping poisonous powders into wells for the purpose of killing the village. In the province of Capiz, an American teacher was killed because of the rumor that he was dropping poison on the wells to kill the natives. There was also a story that widely circulated that the houses of the poor were burned in order to make room for the future dwellings of rich Americans. Actual abuses were committed by inexperienced or stern health inspectors who also happened to be American soldiers. So instead of cooperate, of course, why would we cooperate? You're going to kill us, said the natives. So we'll just escape, and we'll just leave our dead relatives or dead loved ones here. Okay. Now, a national daily called Soberania Nacional published an article that vividly depicted the alleged horrors of the San Lazaro Hospital. Now, the Soberania Nacional is a Spanish daily, and of course, it's a propaganda material against the Americans. Now, it is said that naked bodies, that in the San Lazaro Hospital, naked bodies, are tagged with their feet tied together. They're left lying about the entrance of the institution. Within 24 hours after its appearance, terror reigned among the lower classes. The living and dead cholera victims were being smuggled out of the city to neighboring provinces. As such, at the start of the campaign against cholera, which was sort of a failure, Victor Heiser agreed. Victor Heiser was the director of the Bureau of Health back then. He agreed that these misconceptions favored the spread of cholera, and it would be best remedied by science-backed and a more sensitive approach towards a health education campaign for the natives of the Philippines. Now let's try to take a look at the cases here in Capiz. Now let's a little profile of Capiz in the 19th and early 20th century. This was a time when the province of Capiz only had 10,000 inhabitants, okay? When we were the biggest rice exporter in the entire Panay Island, okay? When we were back then the biggest manufacturer of nipa wine in the Philippines, when we were also the biggest supplier of nipa in the Philippines, aside from producing corn, cocoa, and cotton. Okay, so in 1901, an American teacher by the name of Mary Helen Fee, if you're from Capiz National High School, Mary Helen Fee was the first principal. Now, Mary Helen Fee described the El Pueblo de Capiz, or the town of Capiz, as one of a greatest charm, one that I love best to remember. There were the Great Square, several squat stone buildings, which I knew for jail and municipal quarters, and a flagstaff with the stars and stripes whipping the breeze from its top. Over all hung a dazzling blue and an atmosphere crystal clear. Back of the town, a low unforested mountain heaved a grassy shoulder above the palms, and far off there was a violet tracery of more mountains. This was how Mary Helen Fee described Capiz back then. However, of course, she will be surprised later on that an avalanche of diseases actually inflict the people of Capiz, one that had started decades earlier. Now, let's go back a little, way back sometime in the 1880s. A medico titular, or a medical doctor, was assigned in every province to take care of the sick. Okay? Now, the medico titular at the end of his term, he would write a report about his experiences in the province where he was assigned. And this document is called the Memoria Medica. And the medical titular would be very specific in describing the nature of his work and the medical conditions that was prevailing in the province where he was assigned. Now, in Capiz, this was what our medical titular observed. In the month of March until June, a lot of people suffered from skin diseases because of the hot weather. Now, at the onset of the monsoon season in June and July, this was when respiratory ailments would begin to show out because of the cold winds. Now, this was way back when the weather, the climate were more predictable than compared to what we are enduring right now. Now, during dry season, ailments observed in Capiz include gastralgia or stomach ache. We also have gastroenteritis or colic, catarrh intestinalis or intestinal colds, enteritis, colitis, dysentery. Now, as such, the natives of Capiz were told to refrain from eating too much. And if this is the case, one had to slow down so the stomach would digest. Now, the medical titular also noted that hygiene and sanitation were a major concern among the locals. Now, the medical titular said that this is in reference to the provincial jail. The provincial jail measured a little over 20 meters, and yet there were some 500 prisoners. In his opinion, the space allotted for the prisoners was not just too small, it's also very unhygienic, and it was a perfect breeding ground for infection. Later, when the Americans came in and the cholera was very rampant, there was even a report that one of the things that they did was they freed all the prisoners, or else they might suffer from the infection as well. Now, this is the case of cholera in 1882. Now, on June 14, 1882, the cholera was already reported in some parts of Sulu. The cholera quickly moved northward. In August 18, it reached the shore of Dumuluk here in Roxas City, brought by a fisherman at night who came from Estancia, where cholera was already recorded. Now, the doctor, whose name was Dr. Rebelo, said cholera exploded like a bomb in Capiz. Locals were dying too fast to keep them up, for the burials. It claimed lives with irresistible violence. Those charged with carrying the corpses frequently felt the first symptoms on the street. Now, after they have buried a victim who died with cholera, those who buried immediately got sick and infected. Now, those who suffered the most were the poor with pre-existing conditions. And the 1882 cholera claimed more than 9,256 lives in 31 towns in Capiz alone. Now, this is the 1888 cholera, 1888-1889 cholera outbreak. It claimed 6,727 lives in Capiz alone. That's roughly in 1 year. You could imagine how much that is. Right now, when we have 1 or 2 deaths, we're so shocked and terrified. But we could imagine the pain, the anguish, an entire province in sorrow and wailing because of cholera. Now let's go to the American period. Okay. This is the 1982 cholera outbreak. Now, the division superintendent back then, E.A. Cuddington, noted that they had to shut down the schools, send the children home, and ask the teachers, the American teachers, to help in the cholera outbreak. So the cholera, according to Cuddington, broke out in the late August 1902. The schools in the different towns were closed and reopened as the necessities of the situation in each town. Now, the case of the cholera came from Iloilo once more. It reached there was cholera outbreak on August 28, 1902 in Iloilo. And in less than 1 month, on September 8, it reached Capiz. Now, according to the director of the Bureau of Health, he recalled in 1916 that poor medical facilities in communities removed from the provincial capital fell for cholera. And there was also misdiagnosis on the end of the local health authorities. For example, in the town of Buruanga, which is now part of Aklan, cholera was misdiagnosed as just mere gastroenteritis. And it took no time until cases increased and spread in nearby towns. Now, the American teacher Mary Helen Fee, in his book, A Woman's Impression of Capiz, had included in her book a detailed diary about her experience of cholera in Capiz. I think for over a month, she had written every day, or at least a few times a week, about the cases of cholera and her observations. Now, here are some of her observations. On September 16, she said that it was common to put lime over the stone flagging below with a large heap at the foot of the stairs so that everybody coming in must walk through it. These were some of the prophylactic methods that they practiced back then or were implemented back then. They washed off all the furniture with agua finicada or diluted carbolic acid. They boiled drinking water, and they also boiled tea towels, which were given to the guests who came and visited. They washed vegetables in carbolic acid and rinsed them in boiled rainwater. Servants were told to disinfect their hands, again using bichloride solution, while cucumber slices were soaked in vinegar before being served during the mealtime. She also said that servants arriving from the market were told to soak all their change in agua finicada. One American wife was so weary of contracting cholera that she baked her own bread. She did not go out. She baked her own bread, and she even told her cook not to leave her house, that she had to lock up at night. This is a little off. She had to lock her up at night for fear he might escape and visit among her relatives. Now, we also noted that a visitor is requested to scrape his feet in the chloride of lime at the foot of the stairs, and on arriving at the top is presented a bowl of agua finicada wherein he or she could wash his hands. A clean towel was also provided. Now, death came in Capiz in huge numbers. We said that the town is this was October 3, the town is unutterably sad. Houses are closed at dusk and not a gleam of light shines forth. Where there used to issue laughter and song, the church, which used to resemble a kaleidoscope with the bright-hued raiment of the women, is now filled with kneeling figures in black. She also said the sickness has not touched the principales, of course, because they have the capacity to do so. Only the poor people are dying. But death has swelled to more than 100 in one day alone, though the disease remains largely among the poor. Yesterday, I saw a man stricken in the street. He lay on his back quite still, but breathing in a horrible way. The bearers came at last and carried him away. Now, in 1903, another epidemic hit Capiz. This started in September 8 when a sick man docked in Libas Port. Now, the sick man was from, again, of course, Estancia in Iloilo, and he did not know that he was sick, but he was already sick. I mean, he was asymptomatic. And the disease quickly spread to every community and every pueblo in the province. A medical inspector was sent to Capiz with medicines and disinfectants, and the cholera hospital, or cholera tent, was built to address the crisis. Now, more than 670 Capiznons died during the cholera outbreak of 1903. Now, here's another case of cholera outbreak in 1908, as reported by Victor Heiser. Now, it started in, of course, it spread from Capiz, Daoc, Bisan, Mambusao, Panay, Pilar, Pontevedra, and many other municipalities in the province of Capiz. Now, the district health officer of Capiz requested the help from the director of health, and he already sent help. But I think Heiser was already exasperated by the fact that the cases continued and went uncontrolled. Now, I think the tired and disappointed director was already questioning the health officer. Why is it still that despite we're sending you funds, we're sending you experts, why is it that you could not give us better results? Now, around this time, there was already the vaccine, and the government pursued health education campaign to halt the spread of the disease. Now, they know that it should start with the locals, with the grassroots. What we need to do is we have to integrate health, hygiene in the curriculum. So it was included in the intermediate courses, the teachings of epidemic control, hygiene, and sanitary work. Now, the Board of Health also issued resolutions and bulletins that guided the community on how to prevent the disease from spreading through proper hygiene and cleanliness. Emphasis was given on sanitation, the types of fruit and vegetables to eat, how to boil water, among others. Hygiene was taken holistically as a path towards wellness that included various physical, environmental, and structural factors. Since a huge portion of the disease in the community affected school children, cholera could be prevented. The Bureau of Health and the Bureau of Education made joint arrangements to hire a medical inspector for schools. In the provincial towns, local health officers scheduled periodic visits to the schools, while the district health officers inspected them during the trips in the municipality. Intermediate science instruction involved the teaching of physiology and hygiene. Studies of epidemic diseases were taught using these bulletins from the Board of Health, which were translated in different languages. Now, American teachers were also at the forefront in advocating hygiene promotions, especially in the provinces where there were no or limited number of medical officers. Since schools were closed over extended periods during the outbreak, the teachers continued to serve with their communities with their wise, courageous, and energetic work. Among others, they lobbied for municipal officials to improve sanitary conditions. They also volunteered to be contact tracers. They also volunteered to quarantine cholera patients, nurse the sick, and bury the dead. However, the American teachers lamented that for this work that they're doing, they did not receive additional fees. They still receive the regular salary that they got. No hazard fee, for example. Now, American missionaries who came to Capiz also did their share in alleviating the pain and terror brought by the cholera. Now, when the Baptist mission started in Capiz, headed by Dr. Peter Lerigo, who was also a medical doctor and a theologian at the same time, they have three purposes. Number one is to evangelize. Second is to educate. And the third is to bring medical remedy to the Capiznons who were suffering from, one of them is cholera. And later on, about 5 years after the Baptist missions were 5 years after the Baptist missions were established in Capiz, the Emmanuel Hospital was established, and among those first patients that they catered to were cholera patients. Okay, now, the government also realized that there was a huge importance of promoting cleanliness among the natives. And they also realized the importance of getting clean drinking water in every community to stop not just cholera, but every other gastrointestinal disease that spread in the different parts of the country. Now, Hilda Cordero Fernando, in an article which she wrote in the Filipino Heritage, she observed that when the Americans told the natives to drink clean distilled water 3 times a day, the Americans observed that instead of, the usual way we do right now is we gulp a glass or even a pitcher of water, what the natives, the Americans observed was they literally took the distilled water as a medicine, and they took 3 tablespoons of distilled water. 1 tablespoon in the morning, 1 tablespoon in the afternoon and 1 tablespoon in the evening of distilled water rather than drink distilled water as part of their diet. Of course, you cannot blame them. They could not find distilled water back then because there was no source of clean drinking water. That's why one of the reasons why the Americans built a lot of water tanks in the Philippines was to alleviate waterborne diseases. So a small-scale storage of rainwater is a practical solution, but the rich could only afford that. The less fortunate would have to suffice keeping their water storage in a tadiao gathered from the rain. Likewise, later, even in places where other waters are available, many people still depend on large amount of rainwater. Now, it took almost a decade until a concrete water tank was built, considering the financial requirements it entailed. Finally, in 1914, the municipal government of Capiz was able to borrow 5,000 pesos from the insular government for the construction of a reinforced concrete tank of 800,000 liter capacity located at the back of the municipal building. Construction continued from 1916 until 1917. The water tank was already functional by 1917. Now, when Victor G. Heiser reported in 1918, he mentioned that the town of Capiz has already developed a project for catching rainwater for the roofs of the principal public buildings. A reinforced concrete tank with a capacity of 1 million liters has been erected. Now, going back, when the Americans implemented, taught the locals on hygiene, sanitation, they also reminded them to make sure that food, especially those taken from the ground or from the soil, should be cleaned thoroughly. Because there was a time when fruits like pineapples, chico, watermelon, apples, radishes, lettuce, cabbage, celery, eggplant, tomato, pepper, cucumber, green onions, turnips, sugarcane, and mangoes, they were all forbidden for consumption because the American authorities were afraid that they might be contaminated with cholera. Same as native delicacies, which were prepared with hands, such as bukayo, ginataan, tikoy, everything else that were prepared by bare hands, including our favorite bagoong. They were all, the natives were all advised not to eat them because they might be contaminated. That was way back when there was, of course, the cholera outbreak. But I'm not sure how many of the residents complied because, of course, if that's the food available, what else would you eat if you don't eat that? Now, considering the impact of health literacy in disease control and prevention, the insular government made sure that relevant information was trickled down to the grassroots level. The Bureau of Education thought that health education should be a family affair. That is why by the 1920s, health education became a vital component in instruction, both in elementary, intermediate, and high school levels. Nurses were employed to teach school children, visit homes to teach parents about health and hygiene. Instructional materials like school news review, the issuance of science and health readers, and more health bulletins written in different languages were issued across the Philippines. With strengthened immunity, advances in medical science, and vigorous campaign by different agencies to promote health and hygiene literacy, the deadly outbreaks of the 2 decades of the 20th century decimated. Now, what could we learn from all this? Now, the cholera epidemic reminds us, well, COVID-19 epidemic reminds us of cholera epidemic and vice versa. The cholera outbreak was a force of nature that has exposed the ill preparedness of colonial officials. Question probably some superstitious beliefs and life ways of the folks, but overall, it impresses on us the lesson that for any reform or change to be successful, cultural sensitivity should be seriously considered. For example, we saw how the neglect and show of response of Spanish colonial officials led to the deadly consequences among the natives of Capiz. For the case of the American colonizers, the disregard for the culture and sensitivities of the natives and immediately imposing their will caused more harm than good. While anti-Americans would say the white colonizers used the issue of cholera, hygiene, and sanitation as proof of our barbaric attributes. As such, all the more that they should assimilate us. We cannot deny the fact that the use of public health literacy and instruction as a tool towards health and wellness, development in health sciences, investments in infrastructure such as construction of a water dam as a source of potable water, construction of schoolhouses, served as a way or another to control cholera outbreaks by 1915 and 1916. There is always a possibility that Western and Eastern health practices could work together. Remember, herbals and botanicals, through science-backed medical and laboratory researches, uncover their medicinal properties. In fact, I think one of the research centers of the University of San Agustin is actually dedicated in developing plant-based medicines. Now, through scientific research, a good example is the coconut oil, which since time immemorial has been used in traditional medicine. It has now been found by scientists here in the Philippines that the coconut oil has antiviral properties which are likely to reduce symptoms of COVID-19. Now, okay, quarantine, physical distancing, we have hand washing, we have disinfection. They all sound familiar, right? These were lessons on cleanliness that were told to our grandfathers and great-grandfathers more than a century ago. And they're still being told to us, being reminded to us up to now. Timeless lessons on disease control and prevention, and yet they still ring a bell and still implies the truth until now. But despite the repeated lessons from the past, why can't we master the art of physical distancing, hand washing, avoiding the crowd as a preventive measure against diseases like COVID-19? Probably this question merits another webinar to hear answers from different perspectives. Now, on the image on the slide, you will see here one of the educational materials being distributed around the country back then. So this is how how the body, gets germs from a sick person, how it is being distributed through air, through aerosol, through contacts, and more. Now, to end my presentation, I'd like to quote Dr. Maria Mercedes Planta, who authored Traditional Medicine in the Colonial Philippines. And she said, healing connotes the protection and promotion not just of the physical, but also of the spiritual and material well-being of an individual. The Filipino conception of healing signifies a holistic view. It is not just all about curing diseases or illnesses, but it is also an indication of an individual's harmonious relationship with his family and community, and I may add, harmonious relationship with nature and the environment. Let us all go back to our theme this afternoon. Hilway, free. I think the definition of Professor Planta best associates Hilway with healing. Because kahilwayan or freedom should also be taken holistically. It is not just the body that should be free to move. A society should also be free or hilway from the evil, from ignorance, from envy. It should translate to our community well-being. Ang kahilwayan sang palibot, sang aton puod, sang aton puso. And now that we are fighting for our freedom from COVID-19, may we look up to that day that we could finally reach our Independence Day from COVID-19. Happy Independence Day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Christian, my dear friend, for that very wonderful and that um, very informative and at the same time interesting sharing of history, of cholera in the Philippines. And in my own and honest perspective, yes, you are very correct that the cholera epidemic of the early 1900s during the Spanish and American periods was really very similar, to what we are suffering uh, this this in this crazy pandemic of COVID also. And likewise, the same um, insights or the same um, anxiety, we might call it, or the same struggles, um, is also being felt by us, especially in this province. Of course, notwithstanding the fact that it's more difficult during those times because of the lack of access to medicine and to, of course, the culture of the Capiz during the time when they are, less educated and they have less information about hygiene and the total well-being. You know. This is also um, a highlight that really health literacy or health education is very crucial, and the role of the teachers and the role of the society in proliferating the correct and the valid information on certain health issues and health bulletins is also of utmost importance. Okay. Thank you so much again, my dear friend, for the very wonderful talk that you have shared to us. I was so excited because you also you also sparked the interest in me to do a little digging of, um, the plants, traditional plants that was used during those times during the colonial Philippines. And before I move to our second speaker this afternoon, congratulations, by the way, friend, um, for your very good publication. The topic that you have shared, I have read that you have published this in a very reputable journal also. Before we proceed to our next speaker, let me remind everyone, please reserve your questions for Sir Christian. No, if you have any inquiries or points of interest that you would like to ask our first speaker, Sir Christian, please reserve them after the second talk to be delivered to us by our second speaker. Now, let me introduce to you again our second speaker, also a prolific writer, a prolific researcher, also an amazing cultural worker. She has done many cultural works, no, across the region in the Visayas and of course in the whole country as well. An educator and at the same time a practicing babaylan. um, uh, she's a faculty member of the West Visayas State University College of Arts and Sciences, but formerly she was also a faculty at the University of the Philippines in the Visayas, and an associate researcher of the Center for West Visayan Studies in that university. So again, let us welcome our second speaker, who would be discussing leadership and power, the Babaylans of Panay during the Spanish period. No other than the beautiful lady in red with the um, trademark red lipstick, Professor Joyce Christine Colon. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Sir Harold. Thank you very much for that introduction. No? I think in your introduction, ang pinaka-amazing dito, babaylan in red lipstick. I think that's the most amazing introduction that you have given to me this afternoon. Let me just share my slide. Okay, is it already reflected? Okay.
Ma'am, the slide is okay.
Okay, Mr. Okay, sige. Good afternoon once again. No? I was listening to the talk of Sir Christian earlier, no? And I have actually known a lot about the cholera period here in the Philippines. And yeah, so for this afternoon, this particular webinar is essentially held in the celebration, the advanced celebration of our June 12 Philippine independence. And I am also an educator, and I always tell my students, just in time, right now we are actually studying the proclamation. I'm also teaching readings in Philippine history in the university. And I tell my students, I think we have some educators with us this afternoon, cultural workers, as well as I think maybe we have some students who are actually listening to our webinar this afternoon. So I always tell my students, so every time we talk about the proclamation of the Philippine independence, that when we try to take a look at the Philippine flag, especially nga kung mag-Independence Day celebration, no? Basically, we are very, dako ng pride natin as we look the Philippine flag nag-wave siya sa babaw, no? But it's also important for us Filipinos to remember that essentially when we try to talk about the independence in the Philippines, our Philippine flag is the symbol, the very symbol. Now we can find significant story, no, in the Philippine flag in itself. And when we go back to the proclamation of the Philippine independence as crafted by Ambrosio Rienzares Bautista and at the behest of Emilio Aguinaldo, we will find out the sentiments of the revolutionaries during that time, both on two important periods in Philippine history. One during the American period, and of course the other one is of course during the Spanish period in the Philippines. Okay, so this afternoon, we're going to talk about the roles of the Babaylan during the Spanish period in the country. So my presentation is entitled Leadership and Power, the Babaylans of Panay during the Spanish period. Since we are talking about independence, let's try to take a look at what are the contributions of women like our Babaylans in Philippine history, the struggle against the colonizers in the country, especially during the Spanish period. The Babaylans in the Philippines are actually known on several names. Of course, they are known by the name of Mumbaki. Some Mumbaki, Mambunong. Here in Panay, we have Babaylan, Baylan, and Maaram, no, among others. These are some of the terms that we use to refer, no, in the Philippine society, we used to refer to the Babaylans that we can find across the country. So these are actually some of the Babaylans I did have the honor to interview at the course through the years, no, as I tried to essentially document their practices. In pre-Hispanic Philippines, the Babaylan is well known in Visayan oral literature. So when we try to read Philippine colonial historiography, try to take a look at, there are many, no, in pre-Hispanic Philippines, it's actually very well known. No? There were a lot of writers who actually mentioned the name of the Babaylans and their practices as well. So basically, the animistic practices are presented in the historical accounts of the Spanish world. Yes, Sir Christian.
Could you could you turn off your video probably so that you
Okay.
hindi masayang imo kay medyo chap naga-ando robot kuno imo sound.
Okay, sige. Let me turn off my video. Okay, I've turned it off. Okay na siya, sir?
Yes, medyo okay na.
Okay na siya? Okay.
Yes, better.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, no? In pre-Hispanic Philippines, the Babaylan is well known in Visayan oral literature. The animistic practices of the Visayans are well documented in the historical accounts of the Spanish rule. And these documentations are actually seen in the writings of, like, say, for example, Huerta, Chirino, Morga, Alcina, and Plasencia. According to Alcina, no, he actually wrote that when we speak of the Babaylan, they are predominantly women. The Babaylan's role bordered on the political as well as being a close advisor of the Dato in almost all matters concerning religion, medicine, natural phenomena. So when we try to take a look at the pre-colonial society in the Philippines and we look into the pillars of the barangay, we will find out that these are the important individuals basically in the barangay. So one, we have the Dato, and then the Panday, and the Babaylan, no, and the Bagani. So the Dato is actually in charge of the political and economic organization of the barangay, while the Panday, no, like they are considered as specialists with particular skills, and they are actually divided into, like, say, for example, Panday Ginto or goldsmith, Panday Bakal, blacksmith, and Panday Anluwagi or builder carpenter. And in the community, you have what we call the Bagani. Yes, Sir Christian?
Naga-robot man gyapon. Ang pwede amo na lang niyo, we will download
okay na. Is it better?
Yeah, I think it's
Mas
better.
tami siya, Miss Joyce. Mas tami.
I actually took off my headphone. Is it better?
Okay. Sige. Yeah.
Okay, is it better? Okay. Sorry, is it better? Is it fine now?
Okay na, medyo okay na.
Okay, sige, I'm sorry. Okay, so as I was mentioning, the pillars of the barangay include 4 important individuals. So as I said, we have the Dato, the Panday, the Bagani, and the Babaylan. And among these pillars of the barangay, no, like the Bagani is in charge of the law and order, peace and stability, while the Babaylan, they are considered as specialists in the fields of culture, religion, medicine, theoretical knowledge about the phenomenon of nature, and they are also considered as harbingers of cultural values and tradition. And if you try to take a look at the roles of the Babaylan in the community, no, they serve as folk therapists, not only addressing the physical ailments, but more especially the mental and emotional stresses experienced by the individual. So because in the pre-colonial society and in the colonial society in the Philippines, the natives were actually there is a prevailing belief among the Filipinos during those times that, of course, the world is not just made up of the physical world, but there is also what we call the supernatural world.
And as such, the Babaylan, as one of the pillars of the barangay, they serve as an intermediary between the physical world and the supernatural world. No? So they are believed to be the only person who had direct access to the world of the spirits. And as such, like say, for example, the Dato, no? Basically, he would consult the Babaylan also. No? So because she is the only one in the community who is considered to have the access to the world of the spirits. No? And of course, this is also one of the roles of Babaylan, the community, which they are quite famous for. They took care of the medical knowledge of the community. And their knowledge about the ethnomedicine, their knowledge on ethnomedicine is very extensive, no? And these Babaylan activities, they serve as what Dr. Magos actually mentioned. She has studied, no, also extensively on the Babaylan tradition in Panay, especially in Antique, no? These Babaylan activities actually serve as a venue for instruction. And as such, we can take a look at the Babaylans also as cultural bearers of the community. When the Spaniards colonized the Philippines, the Babaylan was considered a threat to the colonial and Christianization project. No? The Babaylans and their followers are seen as purveyors of a false religion because they're engaged in animistic practices, which is actually the native religion that existed when the Spaniards or the colonizers colonized the Philippines. And this practically resulted to the persecution of the Babaylans and their followers. So it's safe to say, we knew from Philippine history that the Spanish religious and military conquest did not pass without resistance. And when we try to take a look at this, at the writings, colonial historiography has disapprovingly projected them as witches and devils. When we speak of historiography, it means the process of writing history. And when we try to take a look at the documents during those times, and even during the Spanish period in itself, and America, more so during the Spanish period in the Philippines, basically, they disapprovingly projected them as witches and devils. Like say, for example, Antonio Pigafetta in 1521. Now, we all know who is Antonio Pigafetta. He's quite familiar to us, Filipinos. No? He described, in the earlier colonial historiography, especially the first part of Spanish colonization, sa start pa lang sa Spanish colonization, ang ilang term na ginagamit to refer to the Babaylans like say, the term nila is viejas, which means old women. No? But then later on, as time continues, basically, makita natin that they were using different terms already to refer to this group of women. No? Like first, let me cite the Antonio Pigafetta. He described two native priestesses conducting animist rites, and he referred to them as viejas, which means old women. So wala man siya sa malain gid nga connotation, no? When the Spaniards began to experience organized resistance to their evangelizing and to the Christianization project, the word Babaylan started to be conflated with the Spanish for witch or bruja. From viejas to bruja, from old women to witches, no? So in colonial historiography, these are some of the words. Sa earlier colonial historiography, they called them first as old women, very old women, a sort of a priestess. But then, naka-quotation, I should try to take them from the archives. And then later on, from old women, very old women, and priestess, the word Babaylan was conflated to the word diablesa, band of worthless women, ministers of the devil. So basically, I will show you on the next slide other examples of what they call the Babaylans in colonial historiography before. In Visayas, not really in Panay, but in Visayas, basically, although Alcina mentioned that predominantly the Babaylans during the Spanish period, especially in the 15th, 16th, 16th, 17th century, 15th, 16th century, these were women. There were also records showing that there is also another gender, which is also on the context of Babaylan, and the term that they used was essentially the
term that they used was essentially asob, no? And asob is essentially, it refers to male babaylan in Samar Leyte area. And this was essentially under the writings of Alcina. Tapar and Gregorio Lampiño were also examples, no, that were cited in colonial historiography as babaylans who are not women. Okay. These are some of the words that they have used also in colonial historiography. The word to refer to babaylans, no, hechiceria, okay, which is witch, diablesa, she devil, and then these are the other terms, no, sorceress, priestess, bad woman, priestess of demon, priestess of hell, diabolical, evil, anitera. No, so these are some of the words that were used, no, to refer to babaylans, no, in colonial historiography. The babaylan in Spanish colonial writing, no, like say for example, what Antonio Morga has written about them. Okay, there were no temples
Hello,
throughout this.
Ma'am, your voice is robotic. Star Wars again.
Again, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah,
Is
but
it
it's okay.
better?
It's okay now.
Sorry.
It's okay now. Okay now.
Okay now. I'm sorry.
Thank you, ma'am.
It's with my signal. I'm sorry. Okay now. So going back to my discussion, no, the Catalona utters prayers and perform other ceremonies to the idols for the sick. They believe in omens and superstitions with which the devils inspired them. So from the previous words that I have presented, no, that were used to refer to babaylans in history, no, and they try to describe the practice of babaylanism. These descriptions of shamanism are actually, they are filtered through what we call the gaze of Catholic colonizers. Remember, they have also the Christianization project. No? These are also considered as disapproving projection, which was to dominate the conquistadors' views of the indigenous population throughout colonial domination in the Philippines. Okay, these are also another examples, no, of in colonial historiography that describes the babaylan, no, like in Miguel de Luarca in 1582, the priestess dressed very gaily with garland on their heads and are resplendent with gold. Then the priestess chants her song and invokes the demon, who appears to her all glistening in gold. Then he enters her body and hurls her to the ground, foaming at the mouth as one possessed. Another one by Juan de Plasencia in 1588. The devil was sometimes liable to enter the body of the Catalonan and, assuming her shape and appearance, filled her with so great arrogance that she seemed to shoot flames from her eyes. So when we look at this, we look back into that period in Philippine history. Let's look into the context of why were the babaylans described as such. The friars, there is one important figure introduced during the Spanish colonization in the country, and that figure is the friar or the priest. The friars in the Philippines played an important role, not only in the evangelization of the natives, but also on performing certain administrative functions. And they ended up performing the administrative duties of colonial officials at the local level. You see, kung tanawang tablaan sa una, especially in the early part of colonization in the country, ang mga Spanish colonial basically ang nag-handle, sa nag-perform sa certain administrative functions nila, like say for example, census and tax records, were basically nag-handle sila ang friar who are actually assigned on that particular area. Like these administrative functions, according to Feliz Rodriguez, includes they are responsible for education. They kept the census and tax records, reported on the character of the natives, as well as supervised the selection of local officials, among others. So why am I actually discussing where ang topic babaylan? So why did I introduce the concept of the friar or the priest here? Subok, it's basically because in colonial Philippines, especially during the Spanish period, in the pre-colonial context, the prominent figure in the community is the babaylan, who is a woman. Now, when the Spaniards came in the Philippines, and of course the Spaniards are actually also a patriarchal society, and the image of the friar was also introduced in the community.
So when the friars were actually in the community, one of the first things that they did when they were here in the Philippines, especially as a first part of colonization, is basically they learned Philippine languages and wrote instructional materials for their fellow missionaries. That's why we came across mga vocabularyos, mga dictionaries written by the friars, by the missionaries assigned here in the Philippines. And the friar, at the same time, like the Babaylan, they have also knowledge of medicine since they have lived in the community. Also, basically, nagmingle naman sila sa ilang mga natives, basically. And they try to learn more, not only the language, but the culture of the people in the community. After all, this is needed, basically, in order to evangelize them, to understand the people that you are actually dealing with in the community. So, both the priest and the Babaylan, they had knowledge of medicine and of different areas such as agriculture. So you have the figure of the Babaylan, who is a woman, and the figure of the priest as a man. Okay. In colonial historiography, when we try to take a look at that, now let's transition in Panay. No, let's try to take a look at Panay. In the writings that we can find, these writers essentially points to the fact that Panay is, one of the cradle of Babaylan tradition in this part of the Visayas, and these are some of the materials that we can actually read, in relation to the Babaylan tradition here, like kay Estros, kay Noble, and then kay Fernandez. Especially Fernandez has written extensively, especially sa Ang Foundation of Towns ni Fernandez, and Leroy, and then of course we can find extensive if we sift through the Philippine Islands, sa Emma Blair and James Alexander Robertson. Basically we can find descriptions of Babaylanic traditions in this part of Panay. Okay. So Panay's cradle of Babaylan tradition, in this particular writings, a number of them actually stated that when we speak of Babaylanic tradition in Panay, prominently, these are some of the towns, and a province na very prominent is the interior towns of Lambunaw and Tubungan in Iloilo, and the province of Artique are considered as a stronghold of Babaylanes, They're considered a stronghold of the Babaylanes, and you can find this in the writings, And okay. Like say, for example, see Father Juan Fernandez, he has written in his monografias, the Antiqueños were noted for their superstitions. They were obstinate to the influx of change. These people were children of superstition. So though na-highlight ni nila, I think several materials actually that I have come across always mentioned ang province of Antique, to be basically the cradle of Babaylan tradition, The Babaylans openly resist the friars who were bent in wiping out the native religion. And this led to the drastic resistance to the Spaniards' occupation of the land. This was considered as a notable characteristics of the Babaylans, And the Babaylans in our history, they assumed the dominant role in leading the natives to confront the foreign occupation. The Babaylans in Panay, when these are some of the data I come across, in reference to the Babaylanic traditions that existed in Panay during the Spanish period. So in 1589, Muslims took many inhabitants away from Antique. I'm quoting from the works of Fernandez. The following year, they repeated their assault, and a certain Babaylana took advantage of the situation and began enticing the Christian converts back to the old worship of the spirits. Alcina also noted that in the town of Sibalon, I think he was referring to the town of Sibalom in Antique, a group of friars dug up the remains of a priestess and threw them into a waste pit. Fernandez again, in 1797, 1798, there were 180 diabolical women who gathered in the town of Sibalom and Antique and had an uprising. In 1663, in a religious uprising in Panay, a priestess branded as a shameless prostitute, with no explicitly sexual offenses on record, was impaled alive, and when she died, her body was thrown into a river. This was also according to Velarde. So when you try to take a look at how historiography, how how they essentially see women during this time, no? There's actually a term na to much of those who wrote about women in colonial historiography are men, no? So medyo phallogocentric siya, no? So in 15 and then no, kung magtanaw kita, no, we try to research about the names of these women. Usually we cannot really find the exact names, no, the friars, no, or the chroniclers. They do not provide exact name of this particular babaylans, no. They just call them by this particular ang mga terms ginaginhatag ko, no. But there was actually one who was there were examples, no. Like say for example Dupinagay, no, in 1596 when the Muslims invaded Panay, a woman named Dupinagay tried to win the natives back to the worship of spirits. And there were other two, no. One was named Agustinia Hitikon and Monica Gapon. And another one later on, no, in the 19th century especially, is basically the one is called Estrella Bangut Banwa. Pero in the earlier colonial historiography, no, wala masyado ang mga ngalan nila ginamention aside from these examples only. And I think this kind of, I don't want to use the term tradition, no, but in colonial historiography, this seems to be the problem usually when we try to take a look at, no, the women's role in history. You have to really dig deeper. Okay, so basically in 60, that's one, no, Agustinia Hitikon and Monica Gapon. Other than these names of this particular babaylan as women babaylans, no, I haven't come across sa iba pagid, no. These are just the names I have come across, no. And in, like say for example, no, in 1615, another one by Fernandez, the Agustinians took charge of Dumalag in the caves of Mount Pangilaron or Monte Blanco. The babaylanes, according to Fernandez, frequently performed ceremonies and oracles and drew inspiration and healing power by performing solemnities, no. Another one, basically, the roles of the babaylan is also shown in this particular narrative, no. Oral tradition among shamans of Panay recount 3 years of drought and famine that ravaged the town and left people dying of starvation and thirst, as all the rivers and springs had dried up. So basically, they enlisted, no, they called on the babaylan, basically in the name of Estrella Bangut Banwa. For 3 years, no, may drought siya and famine, may gutom. And then according to the narrative, no, they actually went into the to the priest assigned in that particular town. Then basically, no, nangadi sila, but you know, to no avail. And then the people essentially, no, go to the babaylan, and then the babaylan perform a ritual, and that ritual later, no, is primarily known as the Panait ritual. And this is the same famine also mentioned in the Agustina record that befell San Joaquin in 1877. So the towns of like Miagao and San Joaquin, basically, no, the name of Estrella Bangut Banwa is also recounted, no. Estrella Bangut Banwa is one of the, I mean, if we talk about being famous as a babaylan, no, basically Estrella Bangut Banwa is the famous here in Panay. And as such, when she died, essentially, no, she was elevated to the status of an ancestor with mystical prowess, no. And it said, no, ang term nga papu, no. And she is also revered as the matriarch and founder of a group of shamans in Antique province. When I went to Antique, no, I tried to talk to some people in the community on the course of my documentation for the ancestral lands of the indigenous people. So in one of the areas that I went essentially is also an area where we can find a number of babaylans. And, you know, some of them would really trace their roots, no, to this babaylan, no, Estrella Bangut Banwa. No? And she's considered Estrella tagsagud kang kalibutan. They call her tagsagud kang kalibutan, caretaker of the world. So such is the power of this particular babaylan, Estrella Bangut Banwa, because they have this belief. When you go into some areas in some areas in Antique, and this was also, I think, documented by Dr. Magos, no, today when you go there, no, they believe, no, you will hear these stories from the old people in the community. They believe that Panay is the sacred center of the universe. Yeah. Basically, no, sacred center of the universe, or ang apat kaharigi kakalibutan, or what we call the 4 pillars supporting the world, are believed to be located in Panay. No, the 4 pillars are to be found in the towns of like Dao, no, San Remigio, Aninie, and in Tubungan, in Balabago specifically. No, so this is the current belief. This is the current belief of some of the Antiqueños. But generally, when we go back to colonial writings, found during the Spanish period, essentially, there were actually accounts of this particular group of Babaylans taking a pilgrimage, once every 7 years, as well as also yearly. May ara man nga nagakadto sila didto. Basically, every year may ara sila, and then a big celebration ko pala, parang dako nga conference, grand conference ang mga Babaylan will take place, for a number of years, pero every year may ara group nga nagakadto, pero ang pinakadako gid nila basically is joined by Babaylans coming from Negros, from Antique, from Iloilo, and that is documented in colonial writings basically, Okay. This was essentially that particular gathering of the Babaylan, like in Tubungan, according to Eschaz in his writing on 1894, he said that more than 1,000 people scaled Tubungan in 1874 for the great assembly of shamans in a communal ceremony. And then basically, these shamans, these Babaylans would come from areas like Caro, Mandurriao, Molo, Negros, Antique, neighboring towns, in Capiz, basically, Babaylans basically would gather, and they are like thousands of people. They would gather there, And let me read just a portion, This site is witness to many Babaylan adventures in which the learned members, or sabios Babaylanes, as they are called in mountain language, are givers of waters, sun, good and bad weather by intimate contact with the spirits. The big meetings of the well-known curers or medical rurales are held to coincide with our Holy Week. On Wednesday, the entertainment arrives. Gifts, food, men, women, and children from a multitude of Visayan towns. A witness present at the meeting on 1874 held in the mountains of Tubungan reported that more than 1,000 people attended the sacrifices, and that the terciados, or talibon-like weapon, talibones, and lanzas they brought would not fit into 4 carts. In this year, the assembly was the cause of so much admiration by both neophyte and the initiated. So basically, this particular narrative illustrates to us kung ano kadamo ang nag-attend sa communal ceremony, sa panait nga ritual in Tubungan. And this is not only attended by shamans in Tubungan, but Babaylans coming from all over Panay. Okay. So what type of ritual are they performing there? And I'll try to relate it later. Why do I have to discuss about this ritual? The Panait ritual, actually, the word Panait comes from the Visayan term dait, meaning peace and friendship. And this type of ritual is performed for the general well-being of the people, for rain to fall, to ward off pestilence and diseases, as well as for a bountiful harvest. And this particular ritual, the Babaylans, this is also a venue for them to reaffirm their place in the society. And this ritual, the rituals, not only the Panait ritual, but the rituals that the Babaylan would held in the communities, this can be seen as a form of resistance. Seen as a form of resistance is an indigenous way of subverting the religion introduced by the Spaniards. And this also provides the people in the community with an opportunity to articulate their pre-colonial values and traditions, which were suppressed with the Spanish colonization. Okay. So basically, when we try to take a look at that, on the late 19th century, however, late 19th century, especially in the late 19th century, the Babaylans that we can find, not only women, but now, there are many numbers of Babaylans which are actually men. And then later on, with the coming of the Americans, of course, there will be uprisings, basically in resistance, basically that were led also by that are led by the male Babaylans, Okay, where can we find now the Babaylans in contemporary times, So from being female, then asog, then males, then we have now both male and female Babaylans, Babaylan in contemporary times, they have entered areas formerly held by the Datu and the Panday, So kung makita natin, it's important that we keep the Babaylanic tradition in the community. So ang positions formerly held in the pre-colonial society, no, and the pillars of the society as being the dato in the Panday, no. Now women have also entered these particular areas, no, and as such also, no, women have also remained to be caretakers of native intellectual and scientific culture of the community. So we can see women, no, in the medical profession still in the continuing to be very active in the medical profession, also as cultural bearers in the community, also as educators, no, and the like. And they have attained in contemporary culture the Babaylan heritage in the cultural and intellectual fields as well as in other chosen fields of vocation. So I think this is my last slide. Thank you, okay, very, very much for listening, and good afternoon. Happy Independence Day to us. Okay, sir.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Tin, again for the very wonderful, very interesting, and very exciting topic, no, that you have shared to us. We are very grateful, no, that you did not only share to us, no, the history of the Babaylans, but of course you also shared to us the, you know, the essence of women power during the colonial times and up to the contemporary times. Okay, um, so we are now at the one of the most awaited part of today's webinar, no, the Q&A portion. But before that, no, before we ask our questions, and before we feed our interest, no, from the responses of our speakers, um, let us hear first, no, some closing remarks from the curator and the director of the Panublion Museum, no other than our pretty and hardworking director, Miss Cheryl Ann Del Rosario. Miss Che.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I can't see myself.
Hi, Che.
Hi!
Hi.
Anyway, hindi ko makita akong self, but I hope you can see me. Okay. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for everyone who joined our webinar today. May mga familiar faces and names. Thank you for the time today. No, I know it's MECQ and it's pandemic. Do kabudlay sang aton life today, but you know, moving forward and joining activities and this online activities keep us busy. So on behalf of Ang Panublion Museum, and I would like to say thank you, of course, to our Roxas City Government, especially our Mayor, Ronnie Dadivas, for always supporting our activities in the museum. And of course, our partners, University of San Agustin, Center for Heritage and Indigenous Cultures, under Dr. Clement Acevedo. Thank you also for the support, especially for this Zoom account. And of course, Capiz State University for also partnering with us. I would like to say also thank you, special thank you to our friends and speakers, Miss Joyce Colon, who readily said yes to our invitation, and of course, Christian George Acevedo, who is somehow he's like family already and part of our museum, friends of the museum and supporter of the museum as always. And our moderator, Dr. Harold Buenvenida of CAPSU also, CAPSU Pontevedra. So I hope that you will be able to join us also. We will be having more webinar series until next month and through this year, since most of our activities in the museum nag-change, na-close kita, no? Damo sa mga changes. But cultural work will not stop. We should always continue to appreciate and to promote our culture, to educate people. Now that we have the social media and now that we can still have these webinars, let's grab that opportunity. I hope that you will continue to be with us. We will update you and we will promote always our activities through Panublion Museum page and of course through CAPSU also and University of San Agustin. So I hope you learned a lot today. And once again, thank you. And I hope to see you soon. Not online, but see you again. I hope to see you soon face-to-face na. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Che, for always providing us the opportunity to partner with you, and of course for giving us this platform, no, and of course to Dr. Clement, no, for collaborating always with the museum and of course with other institutions in providing us also and sharing resources, no, for activities and things like this. And yes, you are very correct that cultural work should not stop. We have a lot of platforms, with the current technology that we have, to still work for culture, the arts, and the heritage. No, and we are appreciative. No, we always appreciate the efforts of the museum to always push forward for activities like this. Okay, so thank you, and yes, see you soon. Okay, so let us now entertain some questions from our participants, no, in this webinar. You may push, sorry, you may post your questions in the chat box, or you may also try to use the the button in the reaction, no, that can be found in the bottom of your panel in Zoom. No, you may raise your hand so that you'll be acknowledged, and you may unmute and share your videos if you want to ask directly our speakers for this afternoon. Okay, so anybody? Okay, so let me shoot the first question. Okay, to my dear friend Sir Christian, I would like to ask this question, no, about, because it's very interesting, no, that you have discussed, no, the situation, or the chronology of events, no, during the cholera pandemic. I just would like to ask, no, because you already said also that those who are well off, and those who have money, the insulares, no, the Spaniards who are here in Capiz and also in the American period, no, they were not that affected because they have the means and the resources, no, to practically prevent at the least, no, the infection, the spread of infection. Okay, I just would like to ask, was it mentioned in the text, no, in the historiography, of the casualties of the Spaniards and even the Americans, no, as compared to their population, no, their local population in the province? So how many percentage of Americans and Spaniards were killed also during the cholera, notwithstanding the fact that they have made measures, no, to prevent, no, unlike the the natives as compared to the natives?
Well, I was not able to find any source that discriminated the casualty, whether it's native, it's Spanish, it's Chinese, or it's American. But because the data that I was able to cull from the archives of from the digital records of the Bureau of Health, they were all lumped together. So it's difficult to discriminate who among were the natives, who among were the Spanish, who among were the Americans. But I am pretty sure that it represented a big percentage of the population of the province. And I was able to see a graph. This was way back in 1882 that showed that in the province of Capiz alone, the number of deaths during that year for 1882 was about 50% when you compared to the number of births for that year. So you could imagine it's a big number already.
Yeah. So really there was a a surge, like, how do we say this, like an apocalyptic pandemic during that time,
Yeah.
It was like
Simply
50% is half of the population, really,
Yes.
And we might also is it also safe to assume that majority of those numbers are the young ones and the old ones, like the susceptible
Yeah, because
population? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, because we know,
Yes.
like, if we try to compare actually the the pandemic, the cholera pandemic, and the current pandemic that we are suffering right now, we might also try to compare, the to what age group does the infection hit the most, So right now, most probably, it's safe to say, that majority of the casualties or the mortality rates comes from the senior citizens, right? The older ones was
As what they have also,
yeah.
as what the texts also said, that those who have already comorbidities,
Yeah.
so use the modern term comorbidity, and were among those who were the first to catch the disease. And I remember there was an article or a diary entry by Dr. Lerigo, and he noted there that he actually helped a mother give birth when he arrived here, and he said that uh, uh, the child, the baby, a few days after succumbed to cholera.
Oh.
So, and the mother was actually poor.
Oh.
And there was actually a discrimination among the American guests from the mestizo and the Spanish class. In fact, those who died, who were American Baptists or who were Americans, but not Catholics, they were not allowed to be buried in the Catholic cemetery. They were buried a hill somewhere outside the pueblo. So he noted there the great discrimination that the American missionaries also endured from the mestizos, from the principalia of the town way back then.
Yeah, that's practically correct, no? Because by tradition and by culture of the Spaniards, especially the early Catholic, the Catholics, the 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 zealous ones, the pious ones, they would not allow, non-Catholics to be buried in Catholic cemeteries because they would think that if you were not buried, if you're not blessed on hallowed grounds, you would not go to heaven.
And I also noticed there were even discriminations among the Americans because when all of these teachers came, the American militaries are actually hesitant to accept them also. So, you know,
Oh, that's so sad, actually. No, amongst them, they also suffer those kind of. But and to think, cholera is not an airborne disease. No, it's a waterborne disease, right? And the primary channel of infection is by ingestion, no, by dirty food and dirty water. Okay. This is just a point of curiosity because the timeline that you have presented during the cholera pandemic, this was also the time where in the Western world, like in the US, they're suffering from the Spanish flu. Right? Am I right? So
yeah.
yeah.
But it came,
And
but it came a little rather late when,
yeah.
of course, the Americans came in. That's when all of these changes and developments in the public health sector arrived as well.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Well, anyways, the what I'm so happy, that I have gained new knowledge and I have gained new perspective, that um basically, hygiene is key, right? That's why.
But the plants just came in because I was plantita and I was curious.
Yeah, of course, yes. And yes, I would.
All these plants.
Yeah, I would be. That's why I'm very curious that, like, a few days ago you were asking me about the scientific names of the two plants that were used as cures.
I was actually reading the folk tale about the cholera. So I was curious about all of this, all the two plants mentioned in the story. So I asked you first, and then I started digging the internet and digging the book that I have. So that's where I found it.
Yeah, and of course, like the in connection to Mom Christine's presentation also, no, like ethnobotany is really ethnobotany plays a major role in all of these things, like the practices of the Babaylans, like the common cures that we have even right now, right? The gingers,
Yes, sir.
The
Sir Harold.
yes.
Sir Harold, I was listening, no? I just want to add to what
Yes,
Sir
of course,
Christian earlier, no, because we were talking about the cholera, and then we have the pandemic right now. In in our history in the Philippines, actually, no, we also have another pandemic, which we were also affected. And I think Sir Christian has come across this one. 1918 and 1919 influenza pandemic, which has essentially claimed more than 80,000 lives in the Philippines during that time. And I think I remember Sir Christian earlier saying, because you were raising the question on whether there was a specific data na nakasegregate siya, no? Ang casualties, no? Basically, actually, the same also, no, I think Sir Christian was saying, I would have to agree with him, because when you try to take a look at the data that you can find late 19th century and early 20th century dealing with the cholera and influenza, basically ang makita mo lang usually is like breakdown, no, sa mga naapektuhan and then the deaths, no, from each town or each provinces. So there's a record for each province, and then the breakdown sa mga towns ina kung pila ka tawo ang napatay. So usually, no, magtanaw ka sa mga reports, like government reports usually related to the pandemic that took place in the Philippines. Ang gimana siya, sir, usually makita mo data, no? Hindi man siya gani sex disaggregated data. They are just, no, it's so sad because when we try to reflect today, no, mambabla kita nga, those people become just like, daw ang wa niya doon naging statistics lang gid bala sila, because wala silang specific names, no sex disaggregated data, only numbers from each town kung pila ang napatay, pila ang affected. And you were also saying earlier, sir, no, the role of ethnomedicine. Basically, as I was listening to your ang discussion ni Sir Christian, ang idea, I came across also, I think, Sir Christian, no, because you also have the copy of Plantita, si Miss Maria Mercedes G. Planta. I think you showed it earlier. traditional medicine in the colonial Philippines, 16th to 19th century. I think I also came across on what she mentioned that in the 19th century, in the 20th century, Spaniards who were here in the Philippines, and basically in the towards the 19th century, essentially, no, nagambal siya nga for those who do not have access to healthcare provided by the government. Basically, they resort to the herbolarios, no, to ethnomedicine. So kung ma-relate naman na, no, sa ibang rural areas, no, basically ang ano na inang masuob ka bala, no, and then traditional medicine, they resort to that. Luy-aluy at ang Sir Christian, no? Because they don't have, and Mercedes Planta actually was saying that even if these colonizers essentially medyo daw hindi pa sila sob sa idea, but later on they found also they found out that ibang traditional medicine actually are effective.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about the traditional ecological knowledge, traditional medicinal knowledge of during that time, because up to now, actually, we're doing so right and harmful, and
yes,
knowledge has been passed down, like for example, like the ginger, up to now we're still using that,
Yes, and I also observed that we consult not just one. We actually, when we're actually sick, we consult the priest, we consult the herbolarian, and we consult the medical doctor at the same time.
Yeah.
So, diba? So
Even even us science persons actually, are, because we still believe in the philosophy. I don't know if it's still connected to the culture, Ma'am Tin, no?
Yes.
We still believe in the principle of wala may malain kung if you do adjunct therapy from the albularyo or manugbot-bot or something like that.
Yes, sir, because essentially that's rooted in our culture. It is something that we cannot really do away with. Even gani nga tun nga mga babaylans, no, as folk healers, in one of their roles nga gina-perform as folk healers and herbalist man, no, basically nag-ano man sila, no, kung kita, like for example, no, even if for example nga reliyon mo Kristiyano ikaw, no, but still wala man sakto na sa gambal kano nga wala man sing malain kung mapati ka. Na I think because nga obrahon mo ina kay hindi mo na makapalain sa imo, no. So ang I mean it becomes like a syncretic blend of religion ang gina-practice naton subong.
Yeah, that's true actually. And
right now, like for example, right now, people would say the rosary and drink ginger tea and drink biogesic all at the same time.
Yeah, of course. And we pray the novena to San Roque, and San Rafael. So we always, do that, And sometimes, like right now, if I don't know if there is like science, but of course, as a science person, I know a little bit of chemistry. If you have like small sores in your skin, I still apply lana, coconut oil. If I don't have any, Histacort or anti-allergic cream, coconut oil works.
Is it because of its antibacterial properties? I think, sir, no?
Maybe, but maybe as
or manunggal. Try mo, sir, manunggal.
Manunggal.
Yeah, and just to make sure, the burned lokay-lokay is also added for, additional extra ingredients. Things like that. But it works, I myself can say it works. Okay. Do we have other questions from our participants? Please feel free to ask our two speakers for this afternoon. And by the way, the certificates of participation will be released through emails, that you use during the registration. And if you have any corrections or the spellings of your names or affiliations, please just try to email or contact the secretariat or the organizers, and that's the Ang Panublion Museum. Okay. So, Shout out, hello to the pretty and the most accommodating librarian from Colegio de la Purísima Concepcion, Ma'am Janice. Hello, good afternoon. Um, See you soon, Ma'am Janice. Wala na ko da kapangapi-kapi sa imo nga library. Okay. Any more questions? Some more questions?
Hi. Me. Maybe just a reaction for sa kay Miss Joyce. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go on, Miss Che.
Not a violent reaction, Miss Joyce. I would just like to reiterate ang ginhambal mo gid kagina bala nga how powerful women were before, no, even pre-Spanish time. Daw sila gid ang mga leaders, ang mga kumbaga wise women. Sila ang ginapalapitan sa village nila, no. Every time may mga problema, may sakit, no. So they were very influential. So why women? Why do you think na during that time women, yeah, and then somehow along the way do nag-change siya nga do naging naman ang women na ang naging kumbaga weak and nagiging parang submissive and hindi na male na yung naging dominant, no? So how did that happen? And maybe also what can you say, like when you say Babaylans, no, kagina sa imo to report na there are males now. So ano mas hambal sina sa aton mga indigenous peoples also, no, kay they're the ones gid nga naga-believe and naga-perform sini nga mga rituals. So do you think there's also a difference kay mas paborya sa ila before ang women babaylan to male? Can you give a reaction to that also?
Okay, thank you, Miss Che. No, women empowerment. Actually, when I was doing my presentation, ang last slide, I was looking for your picture, no, nga nagarihom ikaw, but I cannot find sa akon nga file, no, kay tani ikaw tong butang ko sa picture sa last nga presentation. But anyway, no, you were saying that the women were actually considered as powerful during the in our history, in Philippine history, and then you were also, I think you were asking several questions. And then I think you were also asking what happened nga ang amo na nga tabo, and there seems to be an impression that women today are quite submissive. Okay, impression lang kahit hindi man ina generalization, no, because we don't want also to generalize, no. Medyo ang impression nga how did women become submissive, no. I think ang sa first part in the pre-colonial period and even the early part of Spanish colonization in the Philippines, as I have illustrated, no, in the pre-colonial society, figures di bala dato Bagani, and then we have the Panday, and then the only woman among those pillars sa barangay is the Babaylan. And if you try to take a look at colonial historiography, ang Babaylan sang una, and I think that's why kagina nakita nyo sa akon nga presentation, no, very old women, a band of old women, no, because the Babaylans in the context of Philippine history, especially during the Spanish period, usually, no, these are very old women, no, wala ka sa makita nga very young nga babaylan, like siguro mga kaedad ko or kaedad naton Miss Che or younger go sa aton, baw nag-ano na ko sa aton age kung pila, no. So basically these are usually old women in the community, because in order for you to become a babaylan, na established na babaylan, no, may apprenticeship kasi na, no, it takes you actually years to become a babaylan, because basically, no, ang knowledge in the community, no, as a culture bearer, you will have to master and basically tanan nga knowledge gini. Although nga if you are chosen to be a babaylan, basically, no, do may right to may initiation ka kapadira, no, padamguhon ikaw and everything, but you have to become first an apprentice. You have to learn all of this, no, and aside from learning all of this, you have to be chosen. So basically sa question nga ang ano nang natabo sa mga babayi, no, nga sa Spanish period, they're very well known to be respected in the community. Again, kagina no present ko ang figure that was introduced by the Spaniards when they came here in the Philippines is basically ang konteksto sang friar. And a friar is a male, no? While the babaylan is a a female, no? It was perhaps, no, when we see ang explanations ang aton nga mga scholars, they would say nga ang na-ousted, quote and quote lang, I'd like to use the term quote and quote lang, ousted the female Babaylans, no? It was perhaps ang rivalry between the male-led Catholic religion and the native faith. And of course, the native faith is represented by the Babaylan. And the type of religion, the kind of religion which is Christianity introduced in the Philippines is actually male-led Catholic religion. So this, according to some scholars, no, this ousted the female Babaylan. So ang natives in the community or the people in the community, they have, I think, to look for a religious leader, no, parallel to the context of the priest, essentially, because some of these, I mean, no, many of the natives in the community were already na-convert na sila into Christianity. So I think the natives were also looking, the people were also looking for a religious leader parallel to the priest. And we have to remember the Spanish society, the Spaniards is actually highly patriarchal also. And the female Babaylan, no, basically, I think for them was not the answer. So even if she may have had a strong following bilang isa ka leader, but for some people in the community, hindi siya lalaki. Because they were influenced now also with the ideas introduced by the Spanish colonial society in the Philippines, no? So basically, no, and then actually ang process, Miss Che, no, women, not directly pa sa men actually, no, women, and then we have a song who is actually biologically male, pero amo naghambal gani sila ng iba, no, nga kung sa subo nga chimpo matawag naton nga agi, no? So this might ang song, then you have the men. So this might explain, no, ang ginatawag naton nga folk compromise. So in the asog was biologically male and the priest but possessing female qualities. Kaya mga asog na ini in colonial historiography, they were actually described as wearing female nga vestments, nga bayo, no? But possessing, no? So amo na siya, no, ang asog who was biologically male, like the priest, but possessing female qualities of the original Babaylan. So ang acceptance sa subong sang asog as the Babaylan, then nakita nila, no, natives saw the urgent need for a warrior leader. Actually, sa presentation ko dapat medyo malaba pa siya kay by the 19th century, end of the 19th century, and with the coming of the Americans, no, dara na dayon ma-emerge pa ng aton nga mga, I think familiar kita sino mga Pulahanes, no? So we have Pulahanes in Negros, we have in Samar and Leyte, and here also in Panay, no, may ara kita nga mga Pulahanes, and these are usually led by male Babaylans, no? So basically sa periods ng persecution sa mga Babaylanes nato, no, who refused to give up their traditional faith, and the natives were beginning to essentially, no, resist, no, the Spanish colonization. Basically ang nakita nila is that, no, ang they have to look for a religious leader which who is essentially parallel to the priest. And then amo na hambak ginano kay na ano na kita na influence na kita basically sang ideas introduced by the Spaniards in the Philippines nga highly patriarchal sila, no? It's a male-led Catholic religion. And I think I also did mention, no, just ano lang, Miss Che, no, ang konsepto sa ginatawag naton nga phallogocentric, no? Ang phallogocentric, when you look at the colonial historiography, hindi ang laban nga ginasulat pati sa mga babae, usually ang mga lalaki sinaman na nagasulat. You cannot find the woman who actually writes directly gidya about herself or about the women themselves during those particular times. So amo na siya, no, ang idea nga we were the impression, I don't want to say generous, the impression that women became submissive is primarily because of also the introduction of the presence of the Spanish colonizers who were actually highly patriarchal. Che?
Okay, thank you, Miss Joyce.
Okay. Let me ask this question in relation also to the question by Miss Che, because I was about to draw this question to Ma'am In, no? Because June is Pride Month, right? And this is also in connection to, you know, the asog, because I was actually very interested about that the part, no, in that historiography that there are, as what you have described, no, they are male, biologically male, born as males, but they act like females. Well, basically, they have homosexual, you know, essences or the tendencies, no, because they dress like women and they are accepted in the community, no, and even they are initiated in the Babaylan, no, they they are assimilated in the Babaylan culture. Now, let me ask you, Ma'am Tin, no, in the colonial times, um, can we safely say that there were more acceptance about this kind of societal rules, like the homosexuals, like the asog, no, being males but dress like females, and just because of the Western thinking or the Western culture of uh, patriarchy, no, the respect or the what do you call this, the courtesy, you might say that, no, or the even the roles, no, of this homosexual asog, no, has diminished all throughout the times, no. Can you say something about
Sir?
it?
Okay, okay, sorry, sir. Kaya medyo di ko ba- Okay, so basically, Sir Harold, you were asking about the idea of the homosexuals in,
Yeah,
how they
about
approach
the asog.
the historiography, but sir, more so on writings that we can, the data that we can actually gather from what is written in colonial historiography on the roles. They are more accepting of the roles, the different
Yeah.
roles in the society. Not, I think, sir, not only among among the homosexuals, but also with women.
Yeah,
Ang
of
problem
course.
yes, sir, no, because we just celebrated also Women's Month,
Women's
no,
Month,
last
yes.
month, and then Pride Month, no. If you look into colonial historiography and during those times, no, kung tanawon ta ang Philippine society and what is written about them, no, ang sa aton na mga you mentioned about the it's not only the asog and the women, they sa colonial historiography, ang mga babayi, no, let's talk first the women, then I'll talk about the asog. Sa colonial not only in the sa colonial historiography, usually makita naton na ang pagtanaw sa mga babayi is, of course, no, hindi siya equal sa mga lalaki. But there are I think, sir, there are exemptions to that particular notion of ours that women are not seen as equal, basically, of men. Despite of, I think that particular impression only emerged, again, I'd like to say, with the coming of the Spaniards in the Philippines and them being highly patriarchal. But then, I think, no, let me cite an example to illustrate my point. Like, say, for example, makita taang sa kartilya ng Katipunan, sa kartilya ng Katipunan, Emilio Jacinto has written about not treating women as playthings, rather we treat women as our, kumbaga, sir, kung i-translate ko siya, kaupod mo sa kabuhi, katuwang mo sa kabuhi. So no one is really above, no, both men, kasi nga ginatawag, I think, no, I'm quite positive on this. But ginatawag between men and women as reflected, like in the thoughts of Emilio Jacinto, also writings of Jose Rizal, as well as also in the of Andres Bonifacio. So there are also exemptions to the rule. And these are katipuneros and themselves. No? So yung women are submissive, women are actually weak, and all those things were essentially, no, may ara kita nga gender complementarity. This type of men, this idea actually were far ahead of their times kung tanawon naton. Kay pagtanaw nila these are indigenous concepts of gender complementarity. Another example nga ipakita ko is because you brought up as asog, no, ang idea. So the women, in pre-colonial society, they have no problem. They have no problems essentially on accepting ang konsepto.
They have no issues with, you know.
Yeah, yes, sir. Basically, yes. That's right. They have no problem accepting as long as qualified, as long as may calling ikaw, basically you can qualify to be a babaylan. No, so wala siya sambal na dapat ang gender mo babae, kagid amo kagid na. So but then in order for you mo na gani iban ang mga asog naton, when they perform the rites, no, basically nagasuksok sila sa mga pambabayi nga bayo, no. Another example in the 19th century, sir, may ara kita lang kinataw sina nga ang ang term ko lang gamitan for layman, may ginatawag na feminine space, and then there's also like ang space para sa lalaki. So in the 19th century, ang may ara nga space ko, like, for example, makatok si kabalay, makatok ka sa isa kapag may space in women would gather, and then there's also a specific space na ginatawag na gather sila. So sometimes no, may naghambal kita nga nahambal sila nga okay, may ara konteksto sa aton nga effeminate.
Yeah.
Yeah, may context, may naghambal. I think I came across one writing.
Like
yes, sir, in the
men
19th
acting
century.
like women, or they have more
yes, sir.
feminine behavior.
I think may ara gani, sir, no. Example niya kay Sir Rizal, that he was actually saying on the lines of nga si Horace, the action was Rizal gay. So that was 19th century na siya nga concept. Again, when we study also, this is, I think, sir, just sharing man, no, when we study writings in Philippine history, for example, no, may ara kita, as for some historians, so may ara na siya nga idea bala, sir, nga kung mag-study ka sang isa ka idea in a particular century, hindi mo pagamiton ang amuna nga idea, ang modern sa pag-interpret sa amuna siya nga konteksto. Because sometimes no, may context kita nga ginatawag sa Philippine historiography. So to ask the question, was Rizal gay, was basically medyo, ang concept is actually medyo modern na siya.
Yeah, it's a modern.
Parang nga si Rizal is close to his mother, and then it's also known in mga writings that Filipino men, many Filipino men are actually close to their mother, but this necessarily make them gay. So contextual man na siya, sir, no? But then I think what I'm really trying to say is that there is gender complementarity, no? There are indigenous concepts of gender complementarity during the colonial period in the Philippines, as exemplified only among the aton nga mga Philippine signs. No, may ara kita nga indigenous concepts of gender complementarity. As in, no, in the context of Babaylan being a woman, Babaylan can also be an asog, and Babaylan.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Tin. I have learned a lot from from this webinar. No, gender complementarity. That's one takeaway that I would like to to use the idea of that, no, in in many of my intellectual musings. And yes, of course, it's also one good takeaway, no, that sometimes kasi, well, most of the time, no, when we try to read history, we're using our own context and our own perspective as a modern person, no, which is what you're saying, that we should not use our modern concepts or our preconceived ideas, our modern construct in reading, like pre-colonial history, because it might that's what you're saying, it, and what I assume, no, it would be more biased to that effect. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much, Ma'am Tin. I'm always amazed and I'm always glad, to learn new things from you, especially on these kinds of topics and these musings in Philippine history, especially the pre-colonial history. Okay, so anyone, can we entertain last question? Or if there are none, I guess this would be the time to thank our speakers, our wonderful speakers this
Sir
afternoon.
Harold, excuse me.
Yes. Yes.
This is Joey from Pilar.
Can we get a copy? Sir. Of course, yes, Sir Reggie. Hello.
Hi,
Yes,
everyone.
from Pilar. Of course, Reggie.
Yes. This is not really a question. How can we get a hard copy of that presentation, Sir Harold?
Okay. Yeah, we will ask the secretariat if they can email to you of course, with due respect and permission from our speakers, no, we might also like do a digest of the presentation, and which can be shared to you, of course, with your permission, Ma'am Tin and Sir Christian. because there are interested participants to read more about the presentations that we have made.
Yes, sir. It's okay. It's fine. By all means, yes.
Okay, okay.
Thank you,
Yes,
Ma'am. Thank
Sir
you, Ma'am
Reggie.
Tin, and
Yes,
thank you, Sir Harold.
we will ask the secretariat, no, the Panublion Museum secretariat to email to you the copies of the presentation.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
sir.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, do we still have some more um, questions, requests? Again, the certificates will be emailed to you um, um, the, through the email that you have used in the registration. Okay? Wala? Going once, twice. Okay? So I guess that's it, no? That's conclusion of our Hilway webinar for today in of course in celebration for of the Independence Day. That's tomorrow, June 12th. From the bottom of our hearts, we would like to extend again our utmost thanks and gratitude and love and admiration and appreciation to our speakers, my dear friends, Sir Christian from Capiz State University main campus in Roxas City, and of course to our resident Babaylan, Ma'am Tin, mapatayhop gid
Okay,
ako ya sa
sir.
imo very soon.
Sige, sir.
And of course the ever the ever beautiful and exciting Professor Christine Joyce Colon from West Visayas State University for the very amazing and very wonderful sharing of ideas. Okay. Um, and of course, would like to thank also the participants, no, our 30 plus participants who have registered for this webinar. We hope to see you again in the future webinars to be sponsored by Ang Panublion Museum. Of course, with the
Doc
support.
Harold.
Yes, yes, friend. Yes.
Yeah, I have just an announcement. I think this is already approved by the director.
Okay.
Yeah, we would like to I would like to invite everyone for another webinar related to history and culture this coming July. This will be about the maps of Panay Island and
Wow.
the works of Felix Laureano. So the Murillo Bullet, the latest edition of the Murillo Bulletin has just been issued, and it's a very thick book that features the different maps of Panay Island from the earliest period up to the colonial period. So we are very honored to have the researcher himself, Mr. Rafael Lutilla, from UP Diliman, and Dr. Feliz Noel Rodriguez, a visiting researcher at the Ateneo de Zamboanga University. So they have volunteered to talk about these maps of Panay Island and also the photography of Felix Laureano. So we will make future announcements in the coming days. So please stand by at Ang Panublion Museum Facebook page.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sir Christian. Wow, that was an amazing teaser, and I would be very interested to participate because there is one question that is in, very recent issue right now about the claim to Mount ng Tud, and I guess the maps can, tell us something about it.
Yes, probably it could help
Yes,
you.
because we have an ongoing project on the biodiversity project here in the province, and we have issues about the political boundaries of Nangtud with Barbasa, Antique, and Libacao, Aklan. Well, I hope that can help us, clarify, elucidate some issues on, the historical backgrounds of the boundaries, and the claims to that infamous mountain. Well, anyways, so thank you so much, Sir Christian, for the teaser. Again, to our participants, you are always invited. No, just please try to check the FB page of the Ang Panublion Museum for the announcement of the upcoming webinars. No, I guess Miss Che already said to us that there would be 2 more series of webinars, no, to be sponsored by the museum. Okay, so again, thank you so much, everyone, for this wonderful learning afternoon, meaningful learning afternoon, for the sharing of information and ideas from two of our brilliant speakers, and of course, through the efforts of Miss Cheryl Ann Del Rosario, the director of the Ang Panublion Museum, and of course, to my dear cousin, the director of the Center for Indigenous Studies, no, at University of San Agustin, Dr. Clement Acevedo, for always sharing the resources, and of course for always being there supporting the programs, no, the culture, arts, and heritage programs of the museum and the city. Okay, so God bless everyone. Take care, stay safe, and stay happy. Okay. Have a happy weekend, everyone. And
We will have a pictorial first.
oh, sorry, I'm so sorry.
And
I'm so sorry, I was carried away. Yes,
before
can
we
you
end, I
please?
think we prepared certificates for our two speakers.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, of course, of course. Certificate of recognition will be given to our two
So
speakers.
we will post it maybe after the group picture or now. Or now I think it's there now. We are giving the
Okay.
certificate.
Yes. Okay. So let me read to you. Roxas City Government, Ang Panublion Museum, in partnership with Capiz State University Main Campus Library and the Center for Heritage and Indigenous Cultures, the University of San Agustin, present this certificate of appreciation to Christian George Acevedo for sharing his expertise as resource person, significantly contributing to the success of the webinar Hilway Independence Day webinar, given this 11th day of June 2021. Signed, Cheryl Ann V. Del Rosario, Director, Ang Panublion Museum. And of course, the same certificate will be given to Professor Christine Joyce Colon. Thank you so much. It will be sent to you by email, but of course, Christian can claim the printed certificate because it's already there in the museum. May I request everyone to please turn on your, share your videos, turn on your cameras for the official photo op for this webinar.
Okay, please open your cameras.
Everyone, please turn on your cameras. Well, some of them have already left.
Okay, another one, last na lang.
Okay. Well, for those who have turned on their cameras, are we ready?
Okay na sir, nakapture ko na.
Okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, are we good? Another one? Okay, so again, thank you so much. Have a happy weekend, everyone. And mabuhay ang kalayaan. Bye!
Miss you all!
See you soon!
Thank you, Miss Joyce
You're
Christine.
most welcome, always most welcome.
Grabe ka dyan mo energy, friend.
Nagsabi ko, friend, dumay
Bye,
mga
Sir
ari, kagalit ang mga
Joey.
inday-inday.
Hi, Che. Nice to see you, Che.
Bye,
Mr.
friend.
Bye-bye. Yeah.
Si Doc JJ, gali ara ka. Doc JJ, ara ka pa Doc JJ. Stop recording na, Shane.
Stop recording na. Wait lang. Kagina, nag-utod-utod si Miss Joyce. Mayad lang gani. Nagkayo.
Naka-live ta guys sa Facebook.
Stop recording na ta, ha? Okay. Hello? Are you pa si Miss Joyce? Wala na.